Um, there you go. Okay, there we are. We're live. Live on Facebook and live on YouTube. Hello and welcome to Flying High with Flutter. This is your host, Alan Wyma, and today I'm with Luke Urban. Now, Luke is a very interesting guy, so we were just chatting before the show, and I learned so much more about him than I ever would have thought to know about. And but the main thing we bring him on here, of course, is for his versioning of Flutter environments. I thought that was pretty cool and interesting. But you know what? I'm just gonna let him go ahead and introduce himself. So Luke, why don't you go ahead and talk about who you are?
Hi, I'm Luke. I'm a Flutter developer by day and a blogger, as I would say, by night. So I was working on Flutter for, I'm working on Flutter still for about 2 years. And during that time, I developed some packages and some tools to help me work and to make my Flutter development much easier. I'm also interested in many other languages and topics around programming. So I think that will sum up my intro.
Okay. Yeah, why don't you tell us more about, what kind of work do you do actually? Because everybody has a really different job, obviously. So what kind of things do you do at your work? Because you have a very interesting job, I think. You were talking a little bit about it just before we started.
Yeah, I work in a medtech startup. So we're a company based in Poland that is focusing on helping people. Actually, that's our main goal. So we rewrote the entire application on Flutter because it was so cost effective to do it that we spent the entire year just copying the functionalities from the native Kotlin and Swift to Flutter to maintain the exact copy in each platform. And during that time, I came across some very interesting problems, as I would say, that I think nobody had before. And actually, it came out great. We released the Flutter app at the beginning of March, right before the release of Flutter 2.0, as hopefully people know that Flutter 2.0 was released at the beginning of March as well, but before our release, after our release. And yeah, it's great. I think our work in that company is very important, and actually, Flutter makes it cost effective and much easier to do it, especially in startups where things tend to change so quickly. Each day, I may do something different that wasn't planned, and yeah, that's great. That's what I do.
Are you only working with Flutter, or are you also doing other pieces of the app, or what's kind of
Uh, Helping mostly on Flutter. Like I was doing Flutter up until last month, mainly. It was my main goal to finish that app. But before that, I was helping other friends, other colleagues in their parts on the backend side and on the front end as well. But Flutter was my main goal. And right now, I switched a little bit to writing actually with Python. So last month was Python based, and that's what I do on a daily basis since I think April. But sometimes when Flutter something from Flutter came up, I'm actually doing that as a priority. So yeah, not only Flutter.
But actually, how did you get started into Flutter, right? Everybody's journey is a little bit different. So what was your journey to Flutter?
It wasn't my choice actually. um, my boss actually suggested Flutter, Uh, it was before I came to the company. He was wondering what to pick. Should they pick React Native or should they pick Flutter? Flutter seems a lot younger compared to React Native. It wasn't mature enough, but eventually, after doing some digging, he with me, of course, we together came up with the idea that we should write in Flutter, and that's the reason I came to the company. I didn't know Flutter when I joined them. So I was learning, I think, 2 or 3 months before I joined, and then after this time, I just started doing Flutter, and it was like it was quite hard, to be honest, to jump right into the um, like this enterprise level app. I think it's not like Hello World app, right? It's more advanced than that. So yeah, that's my journey. It wasn't my choice. Previously, before I was actually writing a little bit more in React Native. I was starting with that. Um, so um, yeah, but at the end we picked Flutter.
About your choice.
It was great actually. Um, it's actually great. I was kind of scared about writing it in React Native. Based on what I know by the time, it was quite um, strange to think otherwise and think that Flutter will be better. But looking at it right now, I don't see any other way. Um, I joined heavily on the Flutter community, and it's great. It's much better, I think, that the other one. People are so welcoming and supportive. Um, so it was a great choice. Now when Flutter 2.0 was released, it's even better since yeah the magical six platforms are available to us. So
Kind of curious about your background, right? How did you actually get started into programming, and what did you start off with, and how did you progress in your career?
um, I was studying computer science, but I didn't finish. I was working since my second year in a company, and actually I worked more than I studied, and that evolved into more advanced topics. I was a backend developer at first, then I switched to the front end, then I switched a little bit to the DevOps side, and eventually at the end I was doing the project that was containing almost every part of it. Um, and during this time, I always thought that it doesn't matter what language you're picking. It's like the way of thinking that matters. And actually, I, I'm thinking that it doesn't matter what language I choose. I have the same way of thinking about it, and that helps me like learn new things much quicker. And yeah, so I have a little bit background, uh, so it's not like I'm self-taught. Um, I'm mostly self-taught, but with some computer degree background, as I would say.
You're using for the back end. I mean, obviously front end is always HTML, CSS, JavaScript if you have to, but how about back end? Is he doing typical PHP or
Yeah, back then it was PHP, but after the front end period, we switched to Node. Um, so it was PHP with the Symfony framework, then it was front end with Angular, and then actually we switched to the Node.js framework called Nest.js, which is a perfect example of how technologies should learn from each other because the Nest.js was based on how Angular works actually. So it was like take everything um, from Angular that it's DOM related, and put the Node.js inside it, the Express there. So I was using that, and yeah, and that evolves to Flutter eventually.
Now that you did some Node, right? So having the Node experience, did it actually help you at all when you're writing Dart and when you're writing Flutter? I mean, to me, I feel like when I'm writing Dart, I feel like I'm writing like a mix between Java and JavaScript, but mostly on the JavaScript side. So I don't know about how you feel. You feel like, because especially when you have the async await, right? It's very similar to the way JavaScript does theirs.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's very similar. Um, the ASIC are especially similar, but also the all the RX operators and the array modifications methods. So they are very similar. They're different, but usually when I'm searching something for Flutter, I'm usually searching for JavaScript alternative actually, and usually it's like the first thing that comes up. It is the right answer. So yeah, it's very similar, but I wouldn't say that it helped me actually. The As I said, the background behind, so how the asynchronous requests work, that helped me. But actually, the the thing about widget tree, so it was very ugly at first when I looked at Flutter code and Dart code, because usually I was writing the domain-driven design structure like in my project. So I had separate service, separate controller, separate view, and separate styling, for example, in Angular. But in Flutter, it's like it's all in one, and it was at first it was looking very messy. So um, it took me a while to understand how the life cycle of a widget tree should evolve in the app with all the state management solutions, which is the big topic in Flutter community. So to combine the knowledge I had with the knowledge I had to learn, it was very hard to combine those two.
Strange. I mean, it almost seems like a language in its own when you build up your widget tree, right? And it seems like you keep
Yeah,
reconstructing the same thing. It's very weird, but at the same time, it works. And actually, when you can get used to it quite quickly, I think. If you feel about the same way as I do.
yeah. I mean, the concept is very similar because uh, I can say what it looked like in Angular. That we had components there, so it was like the page was constructed with components, and I think React Native has also the same concept. But the way it looked, the like right now my friend and my boss started learning Flutter actually as well to his private project, and when he looked at the Dart code at first, at the Flutter code, he said that it looks ugly, it looks unreadable at first. Uh, but after a while, after getting used to it, he said it's that's how this language looks. That's how this framework is structured. So it's nothing special, nothing ugly about it. It's just its specification.
Actually, I don't know if you noticed, but later this month we actually have the one of the creators of Dart coming on, so it might be pretty interesting to talk to him about this because I am quite interested to know how these things kind of got hooked up. I mean, Dart was, if I understand correctly, supposed to be a kind of a replacement for JavaScript at some point. So it's interesting how it went from there to now, like, back end and also, of course, Flutter, right? Cross-platform. It's very interesting, and how the
Yeah,
power of Dart is what really powers Flutter, right?
Yeah, I also heard that Flutter was that was meant as a separate language. It was not like constructed with Flutter in mind. It was constructed separately and then reused as a Flutter language. So yeah, I mean, we had few like JavaScript replacements. I think for the Node.js, the most recent one is Dino. So let's see how it went. It didn't replace it. I think languages are not replaceable that easily. So, um, but Flutter as a framework, I think will replace most of the current ones because how easy it is actually. Um, so, yeah,
Yeah, I buzz around the Facebook groups a little bit, and I see a lot of kind of more the simpler questions that people. Well, I saw a couple of questions that worried me. One of the questions I saw was, "I want to do Flutter, so what language should I learn?" I'm like, "Wait a minute, you don't even know that Flutter uses Dart?" I was a little bit surprised. And also the typical one is, "I want to build a Uber clone. How do I do it? Who
yeah.
can tell me?" Oh, good luck.
Uh, I have the similar feeling about those groups sometimes. I especially like the question, "Can I run Xcode on Windows?" Um, and and it's like, yeah, you could if you have a Hackintosh and and stuff like that. But yeah, there are very strange questions. I had actually a guy message me on Instagram. Because I always say that if anyone wants to talk to me about programming in general, my DMs are open and I can help if I can. Um, and this one guy reached out to me and he said, "Hey, I want to learn Flutter." And I was like, "Okay, so do you have any programming backgrounds? What do you want to learn first? Do you have any experience with Flutter, or you're just the beginner?" And he said, "No, I'm a graphic designer, and I want to learn to make messenger-like apps using Adobe XD or Sketch to export it to Flutter." And I was like, "Okay, so you want the prototyping tool? I mean, Flutter. You can use Flutter to do it, but I mean, for example, Figma has a great app called Figma Mirror, which you can prototype and basically display the app on your device while you're working. It's not even hot reload; it's just prototyping. So if you want to do prototyping, why picking such a powerful framework as Flutter, right? It's
Say that because I kind of feel that using Flutter to prototype is actually really great and really fun. And I've taught Flutter as a workshop, like just a 1 day, like 4 hour workshop. When you start getting to set state, it gets complicated with people, right? Because it takes some time to understand like what state and why you have to do set state, etc. But just building up like buttons and pages and padding, especially, right? Adding these simple things. And part of the audience of the people who are doing this were graphic designers, and they caught on like that, and they were able to actually build some really interesting stuff. Um, One of the things that they got caught up on was how to style buttons, right? Because styling buttons is difficult because you have to add state property and all this kind of stuff. That's not so fun, but container, card, padding, color, text with text style, especially if you have an HTML, CSS background, very easy to do. You can wrap your head around the main axis alignment with rows and columns. It's very easy to do. So it's really quite interesting what you can do, and that's also what I really like about Flutter is that even as a complete beginner, you could build some really interesting apps, and then just knowing a bit more and knowing a couple more widgets and start combining them in certain different ways, you can really do some interesting stuff. And that's really what attracted to me was that I could build an Xcode app or an Android app, but it would look exactly like the default components because I have no idea how to heck to style this stuff. But with Flutter, it's like, wow, it's really a blank canvas, and because of Flutter, I can do any design. Well, there was one design I had some problems with, but I passed it to one of my developers, and he managed to fix it for me. I was just trying to get something in a certain place, but on different screen sizes, he was able to figure it out. But for me, that was the only time I couldn't figure out how to do it myself. Um,
Yeah, when you said about the axis alignment, I figured out, I remembered what helped me during my first initial Flutter development. So I was kind of struggling with it, the rows and columns concept. So, um, but when it clicked in my head that it's the same as a flex property in CSS, so you have rows and columns. It clicked. It just clicked. It was like immediate. So I realized it's the same thing, and then I was like doing all these layouts much easier from there. So yeah, it is good for prototyping, but I mean, if you have the intent to become this mystical designer developer that Philip talked about on the Flutter engagement, it was a great talk. I often quote him on several things that he said there. So that's a great path. So you're a graphic designer. You have the stylistic thinking. You have the user in mind, and then you start learning Flutter. It's a perfect way to create app from scratch. But if your main goal is to just learn the graphic design as it is, I mean, I feel if you don't consider becoming a programmer or Flutter developer, it's just a little overkill for me. That I would call it that way. But it's true. It's great. But and the second thing I remember that in one of my articles I wrote about Flutter being the framework for building like professional apps, the enterprise level apps. So you have a big company, several apps to maintain, the same business goal. And I talked there about the business logic behind each app. So when you're having a business and you're maintaining several apps, it usually means that you have to have the common business logic. So you're basically doing the same thing, but on each app when it's business focused. So I wrote that, and one of the guy shouted at me on the comment section, telling me that Flutter is a new concept. It's a UI framework. You don't need business logic. You don't need anything. You just need one developer, and that's it. And I was like, is it really? I mean, everything has a business logic. Doing spreadsheet has business logic. So yeah, people I think sometimes consider Flutter UI only framework. I mean, I think that's a common thing that if people don't know the Flutter, his robustness in doing the design often is misled to be just a UI framework.
if you look at their website, they do say it's a UI toolkit, and I do agree that's really what it is. But yeah, of course, I mean, but Dart is still a programming language, right? You can still do it. I think what they may be trying to let me say it this way, right? I've been watching this guy. I think it's called Coding with Mitch. I asked him to come on the show, but he declined. But he started off as a native Android developer, right? And then he made a video, kind of being a little bit critical of Flutter. So he of course he really praised, which is what it is, which is making beautiful UIs and how simple it was. And there's a lot more better things about Flutter, like when you put the app to the background, pull it back out, like the state just saves automatically. You don't have to do anything with this, like on resume and on pause, these kind of callbacks that you usually do in Android. But what he did talk about, and I think is really true, is that um, Flutter, without plugins, Flutter's kind of dead in the water, right? Because you still need to reach into the native SDK. You still need to use these kind of things, right? And if you don't have plugins that dig into the native SDK and get the things that you need, then it's just not going to work out. And I think that's kind of true, right? Because if you look at all the plugins that are very popular, they basically most of them all have like integrations to the native SDK, or they have to call native code, like using Swift or using Java or Kotlin. And even if they go into Windows or Mac or Linux, right, they all have these native code, and you really need that, right? And so, okay, it does make sense to me to call it a native toolkit and with the UI. But yeah, I mean, you still need to call into native SDK to do some really important stuff. I don't know what you think, but that's his basic thing at the end was if the plugin ecosystem is good, then Flutter is really good. If the ecosystem of the plugins for Flutter are bad, that's really bad. That it's exponential in that way, and I think that makes sense. I don't know if you have any kind of opinion about this topic.
Yeah, I agree. I had some problems with packages myself, even with the packages from Flutter team. Most recently, Google changed their policy about storage permissions on Android, affecting my fifth. You cannot ask permission to access all files on the device, and actually the image picker package from Flutter team is using the deprecated methods. So it was like you cannot use it, but it's done by the Flutter teams, and it was quite harsh. Gladly, I wasn't using that package, but I had to remove one of the most important one that we used, the most useful one. But actually, is it that kind of problem? I mean, um, if you're using Flutter to make enterprise level apps, right? Isn't it like you have the experience with the native code, and it's just like you're shaping this beautiful UI with your knowledge about the native SDK? I mean, personally, I did two projects, two things on Flutter that I'm very proud of. One of those is speech recognition, but not based on Siri or Apple or Google ecosystem, but it's based on a 4-year-old project called Pocket Sphinx. I don't know if you remember. Pocket Sphinx was a speech synthesizer slash speech recognition tool um, which converted the words into syllables, and then those syllables were recognized by the device. And actually, some guy a couple of years ago at the beginning of Flutter, he started doing package to connect it to the Flutter using streams. So you had a stream of incoming words that you recognized. Um, but it was hard. But I managed to do it. I have this package in my back drawer. I'm not showing that to anyone because it's not ready to be released. But I mean, the ability to came up with words and for your app to recognize it is very powerful for me. But I wouldn't be able to do it if I only had Flutter knowledge. I had to have some knowledge about programming in general to make it happen. And the second thing was actually like um, like the scanning feature. So you're prompted with a camera, you're snapping a photo, and you're on on the page. So we had to do it basically from scratch with some adjustments, like combining some techniques from native SDK, but it was doable. I don't see any problem. Um, like if you decide to use Flutter, I mean, you're agreeing to the cost of having to do some apps, some code in the native SDK. I mean, I always felt it was kind of natural.
That right, but I think that yeah, I mean I just thought it was interesting because I never thought about that before. That really without the native SDKs to lean back on, Flutter is kind of, I mean, it's just a UI thing. of course, there's some business logic you can write out. I mean, obviously, the more interesting stuff, you still need the native SDK no matter what. So, but I think we're venturing off into an interesting topic. But the show should be this episode should really
Yeah.
about you, right? I did want to ask a little bit more about because you're from Poland, right? So not everybody is in Poland or have been there. I mean, how is the community of Flutter developers out there? Is Flutter actually something, or would you tell us some more about it?
I think it is, but during the current situation, where I wasn't able to discover it that much. I was on one meetup in my city, and it was actually hosted by one of the Google GDEs, Mr. Krzysztof. He's a GDE on Flutter, um, and I think Flutter community is very strong in Poland. I mean, many people are recognized, as I would say. So we have few GDEs, but also, I mean, we have the Flutter Europe hosted in Poland, actually. It's in Warsaw. So I missed that, but I won't miss it again. And I think I think everywhere is a good Flutter community. When I saw the Flutter engagement going on for 2 straight weeks after the initial presentation, it was like crazy to me that this thing happened 2 weeks ago and they are still talking and they are still involved with all those stuff. It was a Flutter engage from all over the world. I don't know how many countries were involved. I was constantly seeing on Twitter that Flutter Engage in certain country was happening, and actually the people involved in Flutter were involved as well in each every one of those Flutter Engage conferences. So it was very nice to see that not only the community is great, but the people behind the framework are also evolved with the community. So it was great to see, and the same goes from in Poland. I mean, the one package I have published, which is we mentioned it before the start of the show, the PayU payment package. Actually, it was the idea of one of the person in the Flutter group on Facebook. So he asked, "What are you guys using to make payments?" And I said I wrote the simplest, dead simple Flutter plugin package to make it possible to pay with PayU, and like few people said, okay, release that, we need this. And it wasn't my idea, I didn't want to publish it, I was actually a little bit ashamed of that. um, but after they said they are interested, I actually created the documentation, I checked the syntax, and released it as a Flutter package. And actually for me it went very nice. Like the outcome was very nice, and people actually think enjoy it.
Your first plugin, you published it. Did you feel like imposter syndrome? Is that kind of what happened? Did you felt like, oh, I could, no?
Imposter syndrome is my middle name, I would say.
Uh,
I always felt that, but then I learned that when you're feeling like an imposter, it means you're doing something right.
mm,
And in my first job, I was like, for a few years, I had some ideas, I had some thoughts about certain topics, about the structure, about how it should work, and I never said a dime. I never said a thing. I kept everything to myself. And then I switched the project, and on the second project, people were like, "Okay, how would you do it?" And I was like, You're asking me? So then I felt the same way as I did company, but then I was asked about it. So I was forced to say it aloud. And actually it turned out I my ideas were semi good, and after implementing those, everyone was happy. So now when I'm thinking, I'm feeling like an imposter. I'm trying to remember that moment that I felt the same way previously, and it's just a feeling. So every time I release new article and I'm afraid to send my friends a link to this, for example, to this podcast, I mean, what they will think, what will happen. I don't have anything to say. I'm not good enough. It's all just feelings. So I think that if you have good intentions and you're patient enough, you're not. You don't have to be worried about being an imposter. You're not. You're just a guy, a person doing what you like, and that's it.
What you mean? I think our story is a little bit similar, where I wasn't asked what should we do. It was more like I was what we call voluntold, right? So whenever some problem came up that nobody had any background in, they just kind of pointed to me and said, "Well, let me give you a background, right?" So I told you, I don't think I kind of told you before. I worked on some native apps, so I wrote a one of our clients. What at the time I worked on an ERP system, and we had a customer who was doing wine on consignment. So they go to a restaurant and they would say, "Okay, we're taking over your wine program. Here's the menu. This is the price per glass. This is the price per bottle. The way we charge you is we charge you per bottle. So whether or not the bottle was drunk, like drank by a customer, you broke it, you lost it, it was stolen or whatever, you pay us." So they'd have to go to every single restaurant, and they used to use pen and paper, and they would write how many bottles there are, and they'd go back and write into the ERP system. We'd calculate the invoice for them. Eventually, they asked for a mobile app because you would just go and you would deliver it, and then you would just use the app, and it would go right away. And so I was told, I asked, "Who's going to write this?" And he said, "What do you mean, who's going to write this? It's you." I said, "What do you mean? What do you mean it's me? I don't know what I'm doing." And they said, "Well, you got to figure it out. Good luck." And then I did this in Android, right? Because Android, you can do whatever. And so I had a Mac. My boss had a Ubuntu machine. And of course, whenever you have Android or iOS, you have to have the other one, right? So they came over to me and they said, "Yeah, guess what? We're going to need a iOS one." "Okay, who's going to do that?" "What do you mean who? Obviously you, right? You're the expert." I've never done iOS before. And they said, "Well, you got to learn it, right?" So that was kind of my foray into mobile apps. And yeah, so I totally understand. So similar story. I think it's quite similar, where you're kind of like put in a position of authority, but at the same time, you weren't really asking for it. It just kind of happens, right?
I'm
So
surprised how similar it is. Actually, if my friend is watching right now, because he said that he would, he's probably laughing very hard at this, because usually when the same story, when something new came up, and there was no one to do it, and no one had the knowledge or no one had the expertise, they usually throw it at me and my friend, and we usually we were usually the ones to make it. Yeah. So I'm very surprised that how similar it is.
what I want to say is that in the end, I mean, it makes you a stronger developer, right? So to me, I've never really written Kotlin before, but last week I spent a lot of time digging into a plugin and just changing everything. And actually, I found a lot of bugs in their software, in their code, just reading it. Like, wait a minute, this is not right. And I change it, and then I'm going to submit a PR pretty soon. But yeah, I was quite surprised, that I have to do all this kind of stuff. So I've always been a little bit of a hacker.
Actually, when you think about it, that's the best way to learn programming. I mean, when you have everything at hand, so you're going to the pub.dev and you're searching for certain plugin, you're searching the solution already. So you're into the solution, and you're not thinking about the problem. You're getting a solution. when you said you submitted a PR to this code, I remember that I already before I started um, Flutter development, I already submitted one to the Flutter community, and it was actually the biometric security thing. I had the feature to make. I had a feature to make that was show the custom biometric prompt, right? So not the system default, but you have to create custom UI, and you have the little fingerprint icon, and you need to press it, and it needs to be custom, right? And it was like, okay, that should be possible. It seems reasonable to do it. And I looked at the documentation, I looked at the code, I looked at the current pull requests that were in the Flutter plugins, because the plugin responsible for biometric authentication is maintained by the Flutter team. So I went there and I said, okay, that I think that's not true, because it's no longer an option to submit your custom UIs, and actually they deleted it. So it was the first involvement in the Flutter community. So I think that taught me a lot more than just googling and searching the packages, because I learned how the platform channels work, how to integrate the Flutter code with the native SDKs. So I mean, yeah, that I think that's the best way to learn, actually.
So you learn quite a bit too because you see how these guys did their code, and that could influence you both in a positive and a negative way, right? Like I've learned
Yeah.
some things probably not to do. um, and also I learned a little bit more about iOS development where you can say, okay, if you're at iOS 10 version, do this. If you're 12, you can do this one instead. It's also very interesting because to me, I always wonder about how you handle these kind of situations, and so that's how you handle it in iOS. Um, how about we're actually talking about a lot of things, right? And I enjoy that, but I think what I think is also interesting. I really want to, and of course, the main topic here is about your tool, right? I
Yep.
remember I think I just joined the Facebook group and I seen that you wrote this thing, and I apologize. I'll just be direct. When I first saw you post that you made this tool, I think I maybe commented, but I know I definitely thought I said, "Why the heck did this idiot?" I said "idiot" to myself. Of course, you're not an idiot, but I just said, "Why the heck did this guy write this tool? What's the point?" Because I like to use ASDF. I don't know if you've ever heard of that before, but that's also like a way to manage different kind of things you install. I use that a lot, and I also use that for Flutter too. And I think I actually made a comment on their post and said, "Why don't you just use ASDF because it already manages more than just Flutter." I think you actually maybe ready to reply to that, and you were like, "Well, I just wanted to have a try and see how it goes." I totally appreciate that, right? You learn a lot from this. Sorry, you're gonna say something?
Yeah, actually, there's a different story behind the creation of this tool. It was also by su- it was quite surprising, because we released our app on the 1st of March, right? And it was in the version 1.225. And after 3 days, we just released our first initial Flutter app. They changed the entire thing. Like, it blew. So after 3 days, I sat down and I upgraded my Flutter, and nothing worked. Nothing worked. It was supposed to, and I tried updating all the packages to the newest version. I upgraded all the new to the all new safety ones. I tried it all, and it still didn't build. So it was the third day of our initial release, after our initial release, and I thought, what the actual frick? What should I do now? And it was like, okay, Flutter is actually a Git repository, right? So you have the path to these SDK, and it's lying there. So I need to revert it. I need to revert to this specific version. I remembered what version it was, so I reverted it, and it didn't work at first. So actually, when you downgrade from it was after the initial release, so maybe they fixed it. But when you downgrade it from version 2.0 to the previous version, something was not right, and you could not build the Flutter app like you previously did it. So I use Fastlane to build my Flutter apps. So I have one command to build three different versions of actually Flutter app. So we have the development app, the stage app, and then we have the pre-release app. And they are all done by typing one command. So, and it had to be that way because we are testing on the new features on the development app. Then we are switching to the staging one when we have the connection to the more production version. And then we have the pre-release version, which has the different API connected, which is connected to the production environment actually. So I had to maintain this three-stage app release procedure. And actually, I spent about half a day thinking how to get my Flutter back, how to get this Flutter repository to work. After making it work, finally after half a day, I said, okay, I need to make a copy of it. I need to make a copy of this repository to be able to switch between those stable working one, and also I need to be able to update my app to the newest Flutter. And actually, I discovered that symlinking the directory to the main Flutter path works. So by doing a simple symlink to the, for example, the stable version that I have, this backup, and the newest version, I just I just created a symlink connecting to one of those, and it was working, right? So that was the idea. So I have two versions working, so I could make it like I can work on my production app, and still I can try to update the app to the newest Flutter. Sorry, I'm not used to talking that much. And actually, I looked at the Flutter version manager because I remember that Node has similar tool. So it was, of course, there. It was Flutter version manager, but it was like working more from the top. So you have the host machine, and you're setting, okay, I need this version and I need that version to be current version of Flutter on my machine. And I was thinking like, okay, that's true, but I don't want to get from my IDE to my like a companion app. I don't know if there was a Flutter version manager sidekick app as they say it. So I looked at the initial documentation and I didn't see anything that was interesting to me. So I was thinking like, okay, I'm switching between branches on my repository. So I'm already in the console, and I'm doing git checkout the update to Flutter 2.0 branch, and I want to just type fit the flat version fit the flat environment to this particular branch, and it's all I wanted. So I was thinking like more from the usability perspective that maybe my tool can be beneficial from the other. I already had it. It was working. The concept was done. So I said, okay, I'm usually the guy who starts something and it's not finishing any project. So I want to start it. I started it, so I finished it. And I just wrote the documentation. I wrote the comments. So I had to make sure that it was that simple. So it's either you're starting a project and you want to like freeze the current version that you have right now, or you can fit your host environment to a certain project. So it's not from the host perspective. It's more from the project perspective. So when you're changing a project and you have this certain version there, you're just typing flan fit and it automatically downloads and sets the version that you have in the file that you can add to your repository. And it was also important because I didn't see anywhere the information what version of Flutter I'm using and on what one on and on what channel. So for those who don't know, Flutter has three channels: dev, stable, master, and depending on the branch, you have different set of features. So the version between master and stable can be a bit different at the time. So it was important me to capture which version and which branch it's on. So that's what I did. I just created a configuration file in the YAML, and then I created a script that's reading that and downloading the version. I also looked at the official Flutter tool to see how they are done, how they did the downgrading part. So actually, they are doing the reset head on the Git. So they're resetting the head to this point in the history of the repository to get the current version. And that's actually the whole reason. So the creation of this tool was to simplify. I broke it, then I fixed it, and I wanted to maintain it. And in the meantime, I wrote several scripts to help me. So I just thought, okay, I have something. Maybe somebody will get something from it. And it wasn't much more than that. I just tried. Somebody, of course, told me that in the comment section, the post that said that somebody said that Flutter Version Manager also has this functionality. But actually, even preparing for this podcast, I was reading the documentation, and it wasn't the main focus on their app. So I think there's still place for a small script like mine to be. So yeah, that's the reason behind the why this tool exists. It was quite funny actually.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with thing like just for fun, or maybe you find that the other ones just don't act the way that you want that to act, right? And I think that's totally fine. I just, the only thing I think I have a problem with is people just create more things just because they think there's nothing else out there, right? But there's a lot of problems when I mean, if you've created your own packages, right? Once you create that package and you put it out there, people are going to be expecting you to maintain that, and that's. I understand that. I also think that because you create something as a package, that you're not going to always be maintaining it. But yeah, there people will come and find you if there's a problem or they think there's a bug, or they want to add something to it, etc. So, do you have anybody else who's actually using the version manager that you created?
I have no idea.
No, nobody
um,
complains, right?
Nobody complained, but actually, I I don't know right now. I don't remember. I'm switching between two things right now. So I'm looking at my uh, payment package and Flutter environment package. So these are my main things that I worked on, and I see that 5 people started and 1 people forked it. So, I mean, I think there is someone who's using that. Um, I even the fork and I see that this person, I I don't know if you can see what he's done with it, uh, but I think he didn't change a thing. He just forked it. So yeah, I mean, I think people are using it. I'm not sure. There's a lot to do about it. I'm aware of some problems. Right now, I'm not fixing them because it's fine by me to make it work like this. There's And there is a way to make everything work perfectly, but there's also the way to break it, as usual with software. And since nobody is asking those questions, I think I will eventually update it. But for now, I don't see the urge. Of course, when somebody asks me to do something, as from for example for the second package, there was a guy who said, okay, that's great, but the documentation says something about the request redirect URL, and it's not clear to me. Can you please clarify in the documentation? And I fixed it right away. In the meantime, I added some features that I knew were missing, but I mean, I'm open to anyone who's willing to help me with that and who sees value in it. But yeah, I mean, this was the project that was meant to be that simple, and yet I wanted to finish it because when you're in the mindset of creating things, and I really want to create things in my life, um, I have the joy from doing that. When you want to create something and you have the mindset that you're starting something and not finishing it, you need to break that cycle. So I think that this Flutter environment package, this simple one, because this is just a one file script, right? It was a quite important one line script to end this endless breaking chain of unfinished projects, as I would say them. So I wanted just to finish it. It was my primary goal. I wanted to add the README file. I wanted to add the license. Now I have in my pipeline to add the contribute MD file for people to know how to contribute. And I don't know if anybody will, but it's not the point. I want to do it. So yeah.
I've seen a lot of people adding that to their repos too.
Yeah, I mean,
Is that too much right now?
right now I think it's too much. I'll start small. We'll see how it when it goes. I'm often the dreamer, so I'm thinking about way ahead about things. So um, I need to focus on what I have now. So I have one branch, no issues. That's great. No pull requests, but if somebody is open, I will add the contribute file, and I think everything is open right now. There's no much code actually to be maintained, but yeah.
We find this tool because I don't think you mentioned where it is exactly, right? It's on GitHub, I'm guessing.
Yeah, it's on GitHub. It's also I'm not promoting it anywhere, to be honest. I just this one time when I released it, I just posted on the Facebook groups and on my Twitter that okay, this is this thing I was playing with. I saw I had a need to do it. I found something that I thought nobody did, but it was already there, and I released it, and it was just it, and that's the that's the only place that you can find it if you're interested. I also posted it recently on my new website, so in the see my work section there is this Flanf package and also the Flutter pay you payment package that I released that I mentioned before.
So
So
the Flemv is at your GitHub at github.com/Luke Urban, so LukeUrban/FLENB Flemv. I guess that's a combination of Flutter and environment, right?
yep,
Okay.
it I don't remember. There was initial name and it was different, but I don't remember it right now. It's
Okay.
like usually I'm more of a guy who thinks there needs to be a perfect name for something that is catchy, that is good, that will say what it is. But Here it was like, okay, I need just to combine those two words. So it wasn't nothing. It was nothing special. I created cool artwork, ASCII artwork though. So
Yeah, this is true. He not a bad job. Looks nice. You got the Flutter logo in there.
yeah,
Looks like.
yeah, it's a Flutter logo. I I didn't make it. I generated it.
Yeah, I figured that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
okay. I think we're running a little bit out of time, but not a big deal. You don't need to go, do you? Or else, if you got a couple more minutes, that would
No.
be good. I know this is during your
Yeah.
working time, right? So I did remember you mentioned that to me.
Nobody will notice. I will. I think I will. I will do my hours later.
Okay. I did hear somebody once tell people that if I'm doing my job, nobody will notice, and if I'm not doing my job, also nobody will notice. So it's like, well, what the heck do you do? Do you do? I forgot the points, but something like that. If I do a really good job, you won't even notice I'm working. So I guess it just means that he makes everything run smoothly. So if it's not running smoothly, then probably he's not working.
Okay, so here's a
But
problem because if I somebody will definitely notice. So
yeah.
I'm not sure about that. Yeah.
Uh, so towards the end of this, I usually ask a couple of questions quite similar, right? So I want to get your background. Um, do you think like what do you use for state management actually in your projects?
It's a funny thing because I have a article coming up about state management. Personally, I use provider, but actually, I'm not a fan of this state management war, as I would call it. So I think people, it was actually based on the same friend that I took previously. He started his project because I told him that state management doesn't matter. Because the Flutter community created so big hype around the Flutter state management that he was afraid to start because he was afraid that he will fail doing the state management properly. And when I said to him, okay, just drop it, just create the state and go from there. If you need something, then ask the question, what do you need? I think provider is great for that. And actually, I know that Tadas was a guest here on your
Mm.
podcast. I was listening actually, and yesterday somebody liked my comment under his video about Riverpod, where I said that great video. It's very simple, that simple, and everything's fine. But and there's a but not about his video, of course, but about the state management. I don't think that state management is required every time. I mean, usually you have some API, you're fetching a data, you have the feature builder, you're uh, building something, and you're just displaying it, right? Um, it's not like the developer quest app that Flutter team made that you click something here and something's changing in three other places. Usually it's more simple than that, and I think for 99% of the 95% of situations, the regular inherited widget or stateful widget will suffice. I think it's enough. But if you want like a good stable solution, I think provider is very good and Riverport as well. Um, I haven't played with Riverport that much, but provider is the one that I think it's most vanilla for Flutter. So I'm a fan of that, and that's the state management that I'm using.
Well, why do you think? I also asked this question too, which is why do you think that state management is such a hot topic in Flutter? Right? To me, it's just like you said, it's like a flame war will start, right?
I have no idea. Actually, I s- I jumped on the train of what state management should I use, and actually I struggled a bit on that, and after doing some features, doing some screens, and I realized that it's not needed. I mean, inherited widget is perfect. I mean, if you structure your tree correctly, and you know what you're passing and what you need, just need to actually you just need to watch the initial Flutter team state management video. It's I think I remember it's like 40 minutes long, but they said something like they mentioned provider, of course, because from what I remember, Flutter team was working on a similar package that provider is, and actually Remy created the provider package, so they didn't like release it. They just said, okay, provider is the similar thing that we were meant to create. Like it was the simultaneous creation of this thing. So they right now in the documentation they are mentioning provider actually as one of those packages, and they said in this video a very important thing that I think most of the developers should remember. Flutter developers should remember and learn that if you need the state to be in two places, just lift the state up. So lift the state to a place where every child can access it, and then you have inherited widget coming into place. And basically, that's what provider is doing, but doing some other things like getting the all the widgets to wrap your hand around it and all the access tools. Um, and yeah, that after watching this video, I remember that I was thinking, okay, that's great. I know what I had to do, and I just did it. And right now, I'm an advocate to just create your software and focus on the problems that you have at hand, not think too far in the future. But I don't know why people are hyping. Maybe Flutter is too easy and they want to complicate it. That's the way to put it.
A big question. So, all right, I think that I asked basically the biggest questions, but I think there's just one last question I wanted to ask, which was, do you have any tips or like warnings for beginners or maybe people who are just getting out of the beginner stage, kind of what they should, watch out for, or maybe just kind of give them a hint about how they can move forward in their Flutter career?
I have two tips actually. One of them is do not copy other people code without thinking what it's doing. So Flutter is one of those languages that you can copy certain widget tree, paste it in your code, and it's working, right? So don't do that without knowing what it does actually. Um, Take some time to get into it and learn how the initial state of the Flutter framework works. So the stateful widget and stateless widget, and also look into inherited widget. Don't copy code, as I would call it. One of the GDEs actually is releasing this tutorials about these beautiful animations, and on one of his posts, of course he's asking for, if you liked it, just buy me a coffee or something, and yeah, you can get something more from me, some more information, some tutorial. But the code is for free. But if you want something more, if you want me to explain how it works, buy me a coffee, right? It's a very fair deal. And somebody asked, okay, but I already have code for free, so why you're asking me for money? I already have it. And it was like, what a piece of guy. He's doing something for you. He wants to teach you something. He wants to bring you value, and you just want to rip off his beautiful code, like the beautiful effect that he got. So that's the first question. First tip: you need to know what you're copying. And the second question is because how Flutter 2.0 changed the game. So I also wrote the article about that. So I'm hyped about Flutter 2.0 as everyone is, but I see some dangers that usually people that with the mindset that okay, what language should I learn to learn Flutter? With this kind of mindset, people can think of Flutter like I will create one code base, and web, Android, iOS, Mac, and Windows. Everything will work out of the box. Like I just need to export it because this is, I think, how Flutter team presented it. But I don't think it's what they meant. I think what they meant is you have a tool that you can build applications for certain platforms for each and every of those platforms. But I think you need to take into consideration that the applications might be different. I mean, the mobile app will behave completely different from Windows app. Windows app will have completely different behavior, for example, for macOS app, because they're completely different operating system and the user base is completely different and their experiences, the design, the things that users used to, they're completely different. Your business logic behind is the same from all of those apps, but remember that it's not like you can deploy application to each and every platform and it's the same code base. You have the tool, you can create app for all of those platforms, but remember to do it responsibly, as I would say. Yeah.
Pretty good tips. Um, is there any shout outs or anything you want to mention before we sign off?
Of course, shout out to my lovely girlfriend who's hopefully listening, and to my friend Kuba, who helped me with the journey uh, on Flutter. And yeah, I think that's it.
Okay. And with that, I thank you for coming on by. You have the scheduling link, so if you want to come back to talk about something in particular, feel free to schedule a session. Otherwise, thank you so much
No
for
problem.
taking time out of your day to join us. And so, with that, I say goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.